The following is a paid informational program. The views and opinions expressed are not necessarily those of the staff, management, or advertisers of WOBL Radio.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Laura Malone. I am the Development Officer with Community Foundation of Lorain County. As many of you know, Community Foundation of Lorain County connects people who care with causes that matter. And part of what we're going to be talking about with today's podcast is our grant making that we do through the Community Foundation, and grants and philanthropy, and how that plays a role in that mission of connecting people who care with causes that matter. So we're going to be talking a little bit with some of my team here at the Community Foundation. We'll be speaking first with myself and Jamie Simoneau, our Program and Integration and Evaluation Officer. And then Aliah Kimbro, our intern, will be joining us later with our Program Officer or Program Associate, Lynn Wrice-Head. And then we'll all reconvene a little bit later in the hour for a recap. So thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to, as you listen to this, visit us on our website, peoplewhocare.org, if you want to look through more of the topics that we're discussing, or else if you want to reach out to us after the podcast at a later date, as you've had a chance to noodle on some of the things we'll be talking about, feel free to call our offices at any time or visit us at any of our email addresses that you will also find on our website, peoplewhocare.org. So I wanted to first go ahead and introduce our Program and Integration Evaluation Officer, Jamie Simoneau, who is with us today. And we wanted to talk a little bit about the overview of the giving landscape. And as we think about charitable giving is extremely prevalent in the United States. It encompasses just under $500 billion last year in charitable giving, and that is B as in $1 billion. What most people don't realize is about 70% of that comes from individuals, folks like you listening on this podcast. 64% of that comes from, 64% of the overall giving comes from what we would refer to as checkbook philanthropy or kitchen table philanthropy, and the daily donations that folks do. Another 9% of that usually comes in bequests that come from donors when they pass away, and what they leave behind is their charitable legacy. And I think if a lot of people were to be asking that question, they would think that it's kind of the opposite of that, that the largest threshold of that might come through corporation and private foundation giving. So as we think about our individual donors and that charitable landscape, Jamie, what do you think has been the hallmark of what the grant making has done at the Community Foundation, and how that has evolved with our donors over the last 40 years?
Sure. Well, good afternoon. It's exciting to be here with my colleague. And I would say that, Community Foundation of Lorain County, we have been able to grant $100 million in our 43 years. And really that is obviously thanks to the generosity of our donors. And when I think about philanthropy, Laura, one of the things that I love about Community Foundation Lorain County and community foundations in general is the idea that you're really democratizing philanthropy. And anybody can be a part of this. Anybody can set up their own fund or be able to contribute to a fund that's been set up that we have. And so for the 700 plus endowed funds that we have, you may have 600 to 700 different causes that matter that people are interested in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, what is the fantastic part about the makeup of a community foundation is that we definitely have over 700 funds that make up the community foundation. We have, over $6 million that we grant out annually to various nonprofits all over Lorain County and in some cases beyond. But a lot of that can start with as small as a $5 gift. And a lot of that can be maybe not necessarily being somebody that creates one of those funds, but somebody that is supporting one of the organizations tied to those funds. If you think about the 700 plus funds that we have, probably about a third of those are related directly for the single single use and benefit of individual nonprofits or the school districts within Lorain County. Lorain County was actually the first community or the community foundation to create school endowments for all of their school districts in Lorain County. So when you think about a third of that giving, you could be somebody that has a kid in one of the local school districts in Wellington or Oberlin or Lorain or Sheffield or Sheffield Lake. You could be somebody that supports an organization like the Free Clinic or the Urban League or the Friendship APL, and you could give a modest donation of $5, $10, $15 to support any of those endowments and be participating in philanthropy. We do have a lot of our grant making, about a third of our grant making that comes through our community grant cycles. And a lot of those are driven, and that's really where Jamie spends a lot of her time. A lot of those are driven by the fuel that's created through those donors that do have the capacity and do have the desire to create specific funds. And those can be field of interest funds that are focusing on a certain topic area, like addiction and recovery, like education, like arts and education, like youth leadership. And, that giving happens within, the parameters of that specific focus area. You could have a donor advised fund where you participate and we at the Community Foundation make suggestions to you based upon your preferences and your vision about where you would want that money to go. And then you tell us which of those organizations in our community grant cycles you want to support. Or you could create what we refer to as a community responsive or a unrestricted fund. And that can go wherever those funds are needed the most within the community. And that's one of the great things about the ability to focus on, where you are with your needs and giving is the idea that the role of the Community Foundation is while, we're the ones that sign off the checks, most of the giving that we do is really articulated by our donors and what they have structured when they created their funds. So, Jamie, when you think about the idea of and let's maybe start, with the broader field of interest fund. And when you think about somebody that may have created a field of interest fund for a specific purpose, they set up those certain guardrails. What do you see has been some of the capacity or some of the ways that they've created that impact with that field of interest fund?
Sure. Well, with our field of interest funds, as you said, there can be any sort of guardrail you want. So there are field of interest funds that we have that may be around a geography. There's a very generous field of interest fund that we have that's around serving residents who live in the city of Lorain. That's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is that we have donors who have come to us and said, this is a particular area that's close to my heart. We have a fund that's set up for Alzheimer's. And in fact, the donor has allowed us to be able to support organizations like the Alzheimer's Association, like Life, a dementia-friendly foundation, that we might not have been able to otherwise, less than the generosity of this donor. We have other field of interest funds. For example, you mentioned those among us who may be struggling with addiction. We have a fund, in fact, that's called the Sobriety Fund. And that, along with others, is to help organizations that are serving those who are struggling with addiction and what that means. And so a field of interest fund, like I said, can be anything from a geography. Sometimes it's about the population. I want this to serve students. I want this to serve those who might have special needs. I want this to serve those who are working on their sobriety. And it's just, when we talk about people who care on causes that matter, it always takes my breath away about how many different ways that you can look at that. And you're right, when we think about our community grant cycles, which in some ways I think at times we're best known for, that's $2 to $2.2 million a year. We just finished up our Health and Human Services cycle, which was $1.3 million. And you're right, if not for donors and their foresight in putting this together, we wouldn't be able to do that.
And I think the beauty of the field of interest funds in particular, and you mentioned the idea of Alzheimer's and Life, a dementia-friendly foundation. While we've been known about Alzheimer's and have talked about Alzheimer's as a healthcare issue for decades now, that organization in particular, Life, a Dementia-Friendly Foundation, is a relatively newer organization. So if somebody would have named just specifically the Alzheimer's Association, that Life would have never had the opportunity for those funds. If you think of the evolution of things that were a challenge medically or educationally, 20, 30 years ago that may not exist now, or things that may be in the future that we haven't had a thought about being a crisis that we're dealing with. The beauty of those field of interest funds is they do allow that flexibility to stay within that core component of what the donor's passion is, but also makes way for the evolution of the needs of the community and how those organizations may change or how those different needs in the community may change over time while still being within those guardrails of that original donor intent.
Sure, that's absolutely the case, because in some of these field of interest funds that may be around geography, you're not limited to one area. When we look at these agreements, there are some that will say, I want to be supporting seniors and youth and those with special needs and those, whatever the case may be, all within the geography. So if your need or your desire from your charitable giving point of view is broad, we can provide that flexibility. And one of the things as well is we talk about then working shoulder to shoulder with our donors, and setting up what's called a donor advised fund, which I'm sure you'll talk about further, or a DAF. And I really love that too, because that's a chance that a donor may set up a path that they want to go through. But really, every time that we're going through our donor cycles, they're able to have that conversation about us, about what are you seeing, what may be new. I've funded this particular organization in the past, but, let me know what the needs of the community are, what might be changing, what, because of the pandemic, might be new. So I really enjoy working with those funds as well.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to the idea of the donor advised funds, because quite often you'll have those field of interest funds that might be tied to that 9% of giving that we talked about, that bequest philanthropy, where somebody may create something in their lifetime, but it's probably more often that might be something that ties into their legacy planning or their estate planning and creating that field of interest fund. So we're not always interacting with the donors and walking hand in hand with them in the same way we are with the donor advised funds. The donor advised funds are wonderful vehicles, and my history prior to Community Foundation was, 11 years in the space of donor advised funds. So I'm a little partial to donor advised funds as a vehicle in and of itself. But, Jamie accentuated the beauty of that in the sense of we are going hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder with the donors and finding out how their needs are evolving, how their wishes are evolving. And there may be certain things that they want to support, this year, but then they run across a change in their life, or they run across a change that they see in their community, and they say, hey, tell me more about this area of focus. And maybe this year I want to use some of my dollars for this purpose. So that donor advised fund can evolve with that donor as that donor is evolving in their own charitable giving process. And that's a great opportunity for us to be able to collaborate and really help them really live out their mission and their dreams and how they want their charitable giving to evolve and to step in. And then, the other great one that is really undervalued and really makes up a small percentage of what we have the resources for are those unrestricted and community responsive funds. So when we talked before about the assets that the Community Foundation has, only about 10% of that funding is really what we would consider to be unrestricted or community responsive. Most of our other funding that we have that we distribute out in the community is coming from those other buckets. They're coming from the donor's wishes in the donor advised fund. They're coming from the school endowments. They're coming from the endowments that were already created to support ABC organization. So only about 10% of our funding comes from that community responsive or that unrestricted funding. And that's really, when we talk about the field of interest, Jamie, and how you have that ability to stay within the guardrails, it has that flexibility, but almost no guardrails.
Right.
Right. And tell us more about what you've seen with the donor impact with those.
Sure. So you're absolutely right, because I love the idea of the foresight that our donors had 20, 30, 40 years ago. But 20, 30, 40 years ago, none of us knew to be talking about digital inclusion, knew what you might be dealing with the pandemic. And so the unrestricted just gives us the beauty of being able to do that. And maybe it's even newer topics that are coming to us. For example, one of the organizations that we have been working with recently that's been serving our Lorain County schools is Life Act. And this is a tender topic, but they work on suicide prevention and mental health around our youth. And that comes from unrestricted.
Yeah.
To be able to serve our students. And some of that has even become a mandate, if you will, from the state, that there's so many hours of programming that our high school students and middle school students need to be experiencing. And we're able to help with that thanks to this unrestricted funding, or this community responsive funding.
Mm-hmm. So explain, Jamie, real quick before we take a break and we have Lynn and we have Aliah come in. But, we talked about our community grant cycle, and you mentioned that that's one of the areas that we're probably most known for. But we've had some evolutions that we've done with that community grant cycle. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, absolutely. So our community grant cycles have in the past, they are obviously necessarily broad because the needs of our community are broad. And I think for the lifetime of the foundation, those had really been known as our deadlines, right? A July grant cycle and a February grant cycle. And as we were undergoing some of our strategic planning and looking at trying to be more responsive and trying to really institute a culture of evaluation and learning among our team. And, how can we build on what we're doing? How can we be following best practices of philanthropy and being more responsive? We decided that for 2023, we would break out these grant cycles to be around categories. So, for example, instead of typically in a grant cycle in the past, you might have had 50 applications, but you might be reviewing everything from animal welfare to Alzheimer's, as we talked about, to youth programming, and everything in between. And as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of diversity in the organizations that are providing those type of services, and even the folks who might be being served, the recipients of that programming. So we said, well, let's start with Health and Human Services. That's the largest piece of our grant cycles. It's about 60% of our general grant cycles. And so let's bring all of those together. And we have found that's been so helpful. It's been so helpful even in the beginning when you're doing the due diligence, when you're looking at your budgets and the 990s, and when we are doing our making sure that we are good stewards of our donors' funds. It makes a difference when we're having conversations with organizations who are providing these services, because you really get to see a broad landscape of what might be happening on a particular topic at any time. It helps us when we go to our grants committee, and we've been able to expand our grants committee to bring in more community members to really have these thoughtful conversations, and that you're not bouncing from here to here, and you're, obviously there's still diversity within Health and Human Services, but you're kind of on this topic or these guardrails that we talked about. And then I think it helps us also with our donors, because then when we're going to donors, we had Health and Human Services, next we'll be announcing education and youth development. And it was really nice when we were doing that, because we had them all at one time, and we could say, here's all the school districts, for example, that we've covered. And we've been able to cover all of them in some way, shape, or form, certainly some more than others. But you wouldn't be able to have that holistic view if you were, each time looking at all of those. And right now, we just had the deadline for arts and culture and what we call strengthening Lorain County. Strengthening Lorain County is very broad. It's anything that doesn't directly fall into those other pieces. And as I said, about 60% is the Health and Human Services, about a quarter of it goes to education and youth development, and then the balance of that is split between arts and culture and strengthening Lorain County.
Mm-hmm. And I think the most fascinating thing when you think about this from a donor perspective, and we talk about these different types of funds, is, for those that have been longtime Lorain County residents, you may recall the quilt squares that are all around the county. That was one of our projects about 10, 15 years ago. And you think about each of those funds that we talk about, the field of interest funds, the donor advised funds, the unrestricted and the community responsive funds, each being their own quilt squares. And you think about that grant cycle as being the quilt itself. And really what we're doing is we're looking at these grantees, we're looking at that funding and saying, okay, so what quilt squares do we use to build that health and human services quilt? Or what quilt squares are we using, as the funds to be that youth and education quilt? Because we're pulling from the directives given by our donors to really put the pieces together and really build that tapestry or that quilt or that fabric that really helps to take care of our community and aid these nonprofits that do such amazing work. And we'll have Lynn and Aliah, talk a little bit more about that. We're going to take a quick break. Jamie and I will be back a little bit later to talk a little bit more as we wrap things up. But, it's been fascinating visiting with you guys. We look forward to sharing more through the course of the hour. But for now, we're going to go ahead and take a break, and we'll see you in a moment.
When I smoke weed, I get lost in the music. I like to isolate each instrument. The rhythmic bass, the harmonies on the piano, and the sticky melody.
Hey, careful, babe. There's someone crossing the street.
Sorry, I didn't see him there.
If you feel different, you drive different. Don't drive high. It's dangerous and illegal everywhere. A message from NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Put your phone on D&D. That means do not disturb when you're driving. And when you're going from point A to B, I need you to stay safe, please, so always sing with me. So put your phone on D&D. That means do not disturb when you're driving. And when you're going from point A to B, I need you to stay safe, please, so always remember this beat.
Don't drive distracted. A message brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Project Yellow Light, and the Ad Council.
Need money for after-school and educational programs for your child? Qualifying families can receive $1,000 per child through Ohio's after-school child enrichment accounts. Funds received by a parent or guardian can be used on a number of educational activities, including tutoring, day camps and field trips, language and music lessons, and much more. You can find the full list of how funds can be spent and begin the process of receiving your educational account. Find out if your family qualifies by visiting aceohio.org today.
Sponsored by the Ohio Department of Education, aired by OAB and this station.
Lake Erie. Dozens of beaches dot the shoreline. And thanks to Adopt a Beach cleanup volunteers, more of these precious spots are healthier, safer, and beautiful. Alliance for the Great Lakes wants you to join this movement with thousands of others that get out each year and make a real difference. About 85% of beach litter is plastic, but with your help, we're cleaning it up. It's fun, easy, and means so much. Go to greatlakes.org/adopt and join us on the beach.
Family dinners, game nights, and holiday parties. It all happens at home. June is Home Ownership Month, and the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, Departments of Commerce and Insurance, want to help Ohioans realize the dream of home ownership. Visit myohiohome.org for more information on how to find a real estate agent, down payment assistance, and more. If you're ready to buy a home, help is available. Visit myohiohome.org. Home ownership. Make it a part of your future. Sponsored by the Ohio Housing Finance Agency and aired by the Ohio Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Together.
Juntos.
Together.
We stand up to cancer.
On Saturday, August 19th, join Stand Up to Cancer for all the inspiration.
Together, we can stand up for our family and friends and everyone who is battling this disease.
Celebrating all the progress and innovation.
So just stand up with us.
One night to save lives. Join the millions in the fight against cancer. Tune in Saturday, August 19th at 8/7 Central on ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC. For more ways to watch, visit standuptocancer.org.
Hey, we are back with the Community Foundation of Lorain County's podcast. My name is Aliah Kimbro, and I am the marketing intern. And I am sitting here with Lynn Wrice-Head, our program associate. Hi, Lynn.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you.
I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you so much, Lynn, for joining us. So we are just going to kind of capitalize off of what Laura and Jamie were already speaking about. So I understand that you kind of work hand in hand with Jamie on some things.
I do. So thank you again for this opportunity. My name is Lynn Wrice-Head, and I am the Program Associate at Community Foundation of Lorain County. I joined the team April 1 of last year, so I'm still in my learning phase. I am a resident of Lorain County, born and raised. I have one daughter who is a teacher in Lorain City Schools. And along with my daughter and my husband, you can find us distributing toiletry items, volunteering at soup kitchens, really doing anything that we can to give our time and talent back to contributing to a healthy community. So my transition into Community Foundation after 20 plus years in the nonprofit sector, working predominantly with the homeless population and food insecurity and other such basic needs, I was excited about this opportunity, which allows me to continue to have a seat at the table and connect people who care what causes them matter. I think it's very important as a person who worked on the front lines to be able to give that perspective to the foundation as we are really concentrating on trust-based philanthropy and building those relationships with our nonprofits and our community.
Yeah, and I love that you spoke, I was going to bring that up, your previous experiences and just even what you choose to do in your free time. So how does those previous experiences, either at work or outside of work, kind of shape your insight and perspective of your current role?
Thank you for asking that question. So I am very excited about that because, as you stated, my previous role has allowed me to interact with many nonprofits. And so many of those nonprofits are in our grant cycles. So we already had that relationship, and being able to build on that, there's a level of trust because I've come from the front lines. Yeah. We're able to have some honest dialogue. I'm able to reach out and really understand that maybe someone who has a staff of 1 or 2 needs more reminders than maybe a person who has a grant writer or a person who has a larger team. So really being able to look to the needs of the individual nonprofits and not lump them together, and understanding that we are in a partnership. So it's important to allow those voices to be at the table. So I think many appreciate, as we have in our grant application, what are you doing around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? Mm-hmm. And we offer a free training. Many didn't know that. So I was able to reach out and contact individuals and say, hey, we have this free opportunity for you. And so they were really excited about that. They really responded well, and they really appreciate that, reaching out. So I think, again, partnerships, relationships, understanding the capacity of the organizations is priceless.
Yeah, and one thing I really love, and we were even thinking about coming on today, is your role as a connector. So what does a day look like for you? How is, you just mentioned one example, but what are more ways that you are able to kind of connect the community and people who are searching for maybe funds or resources to like maybe accomplish their end goal?
So I'm making myself available. I think first and foremost, you must be available. Thankful for the world of Zoom, that we can meet with a lot of individuals by just saying, hey, I'm going to set up a quick Zoom call. Let's discuss your concerns. Let's discuss your ideals and what you're thinking for a grant application. A quick phone chat, sometimes an email. But I truly find the most value in those face-to-face, because you can write something, but as you begin to have a conversation, you learn so much more about the organizations. I also believe that the site visits really help us to connect and really understand what happens in the day in the life of an organization. Many times you have a person in a leadership role or a grant writer writing the grant, but that site visit allows you to talk to the people at the front lines. So you can really connect and hear what they're doing and offer up some resources and solutions for those individuals.
Okay, so I guess my question for you now is, how do we continue, and how do you continue, and as well we work with Jamie, to adequately represent these organizations and these nonprofits?
I would say communication is key. Active listening. Sometimes we tend to think we know what an organization needs, but are really allowing them to have their voices in that space. So really listening and repeating back what I've heard. That way, you're sure to capture what they want and not me talking, but really able to represent the voice of the organization.
Okay, and then in your role and in your own perspective, what about being this connector, what about your current role allows you to continue to feed the passion that lives inside of you?
Again, being able to attend events. You will find me at various events. You will find that I'm one of the first people to volunteer, but I don't not only volunteer myself, I usually involve my whole entire family. So we have a passion for various things. My daughter's passion is the education and youth piece, which is nice for the education cycle. So I usually rely on her to say, hey, you know, what's the trends? What's happening in that area? And we all go and volunteer. My passion is health and human services, so I'm usually the person that connects with the mental health, with the homeless population, with the soup kitchens. And so I always sign us up to volunteer. And my husband, he is more the arts and cultural person, strengthening Lorraine County. So he usually would bring those opportunities. So we kind of book our calendars accordingly, and we try to really give it back, because a healthy community is what my passion is all about.
Yeah, and I think that's so key, because it's not enough for us to simply know what the needs are if we're not willing to, you know, invest our time and invest the time of our family to really address and meet those needs on the front line. So can you share with me an example of two or some impactful projects that you have supported through grants?
Yes, one that comes to mind is P2R. It is a pretty new organization. It was incorporated in 2020. It's led by Wendy Cotwell, who has 30-plus years working with offenders and in the public sector, and she has really hit the ground running. She has a staff, and most of her volunteers have lived experience, so they speak the language of those coming in for services. She's able to be a connector for individuals who are reentering into the community by linking them with resources, providing transportation, really navigating through social service agencies so they can truly re-enter successfully into our community.
Okay. So with organizations, because I'm familiar with P2R and just kind of the work that they're doing, do you think it's important for us to be able to diversify who we're able to support? I know we have the 4 different cycles that, as Laura and Jamie were mentioning, that touch on the different sectors of our community. So is there anything, in your opinion, that is untouched, or should we just continue the efforts that we're currently making?
I truly think we should continue to spread the word about what we do. The opportunity is here, but not everybody is aware. So I found, as I'm out and about and I'm sharing, many people are shocked. I will say, as we have changed our grant cycles into the 3 areas, we've had more individuals coming in for the first time. So I think we're doing an excellent job of letting people know that, hey, we are here, and this is the opportunity to help everyone. So I think education is important, and I think we're doing a good job of reaching everyone in their various grant cycles.
Yeah, and that's our whole goal with this podcast, is that the community that we're serving knows how we're here to help them, and knows that not only are we here to help, but our passion outside of our 9 to 5 is to insert ourselves in these spaces and make Lorraine County the best place, like Cindy always says, to work, live, and play as possible. So we are going to get ready for a break, but we are going to come back with Laura, Jamie, and Lynn as we speak a little bit more about amplifying the voices and the initiatives that we're already currently supporting. So thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you.
If you have Ohio Medicaid, you need to act now. All Medicaid members are required to renew their health coverage. If you are no longer eligible, trained navigators can help for free. Call Get Covered Ohio at 833-628-4467 or visit getcoveredohio.org. This project is supported by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services as part of a financial assistance award totaling $2.33 million with 100% funding by CMS/HHS and do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government. Sponsored by the Ohio Association of Food Banks, aired by OAB and the station.
Get on board. The water is open. It's time to go boating and fishing and leave stress in our wake. Feel the wind as we ride and a fish on the line. Reel in our first catch and feel the sun at our backs. It's get out on the water season. It's time to get on board. Find out where to get on board near you. Visit Take Me Fishing and Discover Boating to learn more. And please recreate responsibly. Get on board. Get on board.
When will the danger become crystal clear? When you read another statistic? When it happens to your neighbor? When your family is shattered? When will you finally take action? Don't let another family's life fall to pieces due to the dangers of unsafe railroad crossings. Report bad railroad crossings at angelsontrack.org. That's angelsontrack.org. Because bad crossings kill good drivers. Sponsored by Angels on Track, aired by OAB and the station.
When I smoke weed, I get lost in the music. I like to isolate each instrument. The rhythmic bass, the harmonies on the piano, the sticky melody.
Hey, careful, babe. There's someone crossing the street.
Sorry, I didn't see him there.
If you feel different, you drive different. Don't drive high. It's dangerous and illegal everywhere. A message from NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Put your phone on D&D. That means do not disturb when you're driving. And when you're going from point A to B, I need you to stay safe, please, so always sing with me. So put your phone on D&D. That means do not disturb when you're driving. And when you're going from point A to B, I need you to stay safe, please, so always remember this beat.
Don't drive distracted. A message brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Project Yellow Light, and the Ad Council.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us. My name is Laura Malone. I'm Development Officer with Community Foundation of Lorain County. And we're talking about people who care about causes that matter, our core mission here at the Community Foundation, and how that ties in with our grant cycles. And Aliah and Lynn were talking earlier about connectivity and being a convener. And I think one of the things that, early on, we were talking about the funding elements, but I wanted to circle back for a second just in regards to the idea of being a philanthropist can be a lot of things beyond just funding. If you talk about the role of philanthropy, and everybody can be a philanthropist, it's really how they use their time, their talent, their treasure, their testimony, and their ties. And that idea of testimony and ties is a great way of being that connector and that convener, and part of that role that we have at the Community Foundation. But I think a lot of folks don't realize that a large part of the Community Foundation is driven by volunteers. We respond to our board that is volunteer driven. The folks that are in our grant cycles as our grants committee are volunteers, and we'll be talking in an upcoming podcast about our scholarships, and those folks that review those scholarship applications are all volunteers. So as we think about the idea of the role of connectivity, and step away for a second from that idea of funding, what are some of the ways that, Lynn, or that you've seen maybe some of the volunteers be engaged, through the Community Foundation, and to the nonprofits, and how that symbiotic relationship fits together?
So for me, as I think about the volunteers, I think about the grants committee because I work so closely with them. They invest a lot of time in reading through every applicant that is submitted to us. They review the financials. They review and read, again, every grant. They compile questions. And they really, really are dedicated to learning more about the nonprofits, which I think is priceless. So putting in that kind of time lets you know that they are passionate about our community and really are supporters of the work that we do and really contributing to a healthy community.
And Jamie, when we think about the idea of mentorship, we have Aliah that's here as an intern. We have Reagan that's another intern, but we also have the programming that we do with the nonprofits to try and, mentor them to various degrees. Tell us a little bit more about how that kind of plays that role in that connectivity and that volunteering and really that role of the Community Foundation.
Sure. Well, when we look at our strategic plan with the Community Foundation, a large part of that is looking at how can we connect the community beyond grant making. And that mentorship, that professional development is a big piece of that. So we invest heavily in the health and capacity of our nonprofits, and whether that's partnering with another organization. For example, we often partner with Business Volunteers Unlimited, or they're often known as BVU, to provide courses here in Lorain County that our organizations might not be able to go to otherwise, whether it's on the governance, of your board, whether it's on fundraising, whether it's on finances, to just really bring those pieces together. We look at the programming that we provide to the community around diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, and we are able to provide that to the staff of our nonprofits when they may not be able to make that sort of an investment. And there are times, quite frankly, organizations come to us and, we play a part in the philanthropy in Lorain County. So oftentimes organizations even come to us and say, okay, well, what other connections can you help us make? Whether it's in the funding community, whether it's even in learning how to write a grant. I think Lynn talked earlier about that we serve organizations of all sizes. So that is organizations who it's a one-person show, that one person is doing all the pieces, to organizations that are fortunate to have a grant writer. So we have courses even that we've been able to partner with Candid to be able to talk about whether it's for us or any other funder, how you put together a strong grant application, because we know that there's a very important part that we play in philanthropy and supporting our Lorain County nonprofits. But we're certainly not the only partner. So we want to be able to strengthen our organizations who are serving our residents the best we can.
And I think a lot of times, when donors want to get engaged, but they're not quite sure how or where, because we do touch so many different organizations in the community. They're either part of our grant cycles, or they're fund holders that have endowments with us, or through other means that they may be connected to us in the work in the community. It can be a great one-stop shop, so to speak, for donors who are looking for some level of engagement that may not necessarily even be financial, but just how they can use their time. Or, recently we had a donor that we assisted, that they had a child that had a retail store at one point in time. The child had since passed. They had some of that inventory that was remaining, that was nice home goods, that initially at one point they were thinking, well, maybe they would go ahead and sell at flea markets or do different things down the line. And as time evolved, they were like, that's not really what we want to do. And they wanted to find an organization that would really love these pieces the way their child had loved these pieces, and really be able to find a way to repurpose them for community good. And they were introduced to us by another donor, and we were able to help them match with an organization that was just as excited about those pieces as they were and as their child was when it was part of that child's store, and really be able to facilitate, that connectivity as well. And so as donors think about how they want to spend their time, their talent, their treasure, their ties, their testimony, there's always opportunities where they can do that either at the Community Foundation or help find introductions to other organizations that might meet those needs. And I know, Jamie, you and I were talking, going back for a second, maybe a little bit to that funding element about, funders that might be looking for a way to do something new and different, but not really know where to begin. And I know you were thinking in particular about somebody related to a nonprofit in Elyria.
Sure, absolutely. We were talking earlier about the field of interest, and sometimes donors, as I mentioned, may have a geography or may have a particular population they really want to serve or a need that they want to touch. But other times donors come to us and they may say, okay, I have a couple of these areas, but really what I want is, I am looking to help an organization that maybe, needs some of that first stage funding, or I want to be able to support an organization that has long roots in the community, but maybe this is a critical time. Maybe this is a harder time for them. And we have worked with donors, and one donor in particular is standing out. Well, I think that's the benefit of the collective knowledge that our team has of what's going on, that we were able to come to him and not just bring him one option, but bring him a handful of options, and to give him that backstory of, here's the organization, here, of course, is what they do. You could get this component from their website, right? But here's some of either the issue that they're dealing with at this point, here's maybe the struggle that they're going through, and we were able to connect him with an organization, to be able to provide something outside of a grant cycle, which doesn't happen all the time, but I think that's just the benefit of having the team, the board, the grants committee, that you're not relying on one person's perspective, as Lynn was talking about in our grants committee, because we would never want that to be simply 12 of us at Community Foundation making these decisions. We broaden this to bring it to a grants committee to bring it to our board. And so there's all that collective knowledge then that we can bring to donors to help them with their charitable giving.
And, in that particular instance, we're talking about, a single donor that was looking at something that they were passionate about. But, I think one of the interesting things that I've seen in the 2+ years, 3+ years almost, that I've been at the Community Foundation is the way groups can band together and create something of meaning. And I think about the idea of, we had a fund that was created right around the time that I started at Community Foundation to honor somebody that was retiring from a life of public service. And, that was not a single contribution by a single donor. It was, 100 contributions of, money from 100 different donors that helped to make that gift happen and helped to create that fund to honor that person for his work in public service. And I know we've seen other elements like that as well, Jamie, where there's been that collaborative effort in pulling funds together to create something with meaning and impact.
Sure. I love that story because and I'll never forget that. I had the good fortune that it was a community leader that came in and he had a goal to reach $10,000. And he said, piece of cake. All I need is 100 people to do $100. But I just loved that idea of it's not one person's responsibility. We can all come together to do this. And I also think about our affiliate funds and the grant making that they're doing. When I think about that idea, our Hispanic fund was our first affiliate fund, and that was formed with a gift to honor a physician who had passed. And then came together and grow, and some of the first funds that they provided were scholarships to students at Lorraine High School. And when you think about community members coming together and pooling assets, pooling their giving, and then coming together to make those decisions and to be really what we call proximate or close to whatever the issue is that you're trying to enhance or to solve, I just love the idea of that.
And I think that's an important thing that we haven't touched on yet, is the idea of the affiliate funds and the role they play within the Community Foundation. We talked about the idea that we grant out over $6 million annually, usually about $6.2 million annually, and about, $2+ million of that comes from our community grant cycles, the work that Jamie and Lynn work most closely with our grants committee. And we talked about the idea of some of that grant making being grants to organizations that have endowments with us or the school districts. But we also have the 4 affiliate funds. We have the Hispanic Fund, which Jamie mentioned. We have the African American Community Fund. We have the Women's Fund, and we have the Youth Fund. And each of those are their own independent pillars of grant making, where they have their own independent grant making cycles to focus on the grants that are meaningful to them. Our Youth Fund is an amazing program that is a combination of high school students from all the school districts in Lorain County. Most recently, coming out of the pandemic, their biggest focus has been mental health issues among youth in our community, and really looking at, funding opportunities through the Youth Fund, where organizations are serving the youth needs for mental health. We have the Women's Fund that has been working on their Change the Cycle initiative with period poverty, and just the something I hadn't even really realized in regards to how many women and girls are impacted if they don't have adequate access to feminine hygiene products, and what that means for them missing school or missing work or impacting their livelihood or their education. You have the African American Community Fund that has been around for a very long time, is very active within scholarships and has their own grants that they do, as well as the Hispanic Fund, which Jamie mentioned, which also created their first scholarship fund that they've been doing, and is another example of that, small donations coming through to create that. So I think that's a great element to tie into a lot of this. And, Lynn, when you think of some of the grants that you've seen in your tenure, what have been some of those that you think, I know you mentioned P2R earlier, but what are some of the other areas where you think that have had a lot of impact in the most recent time frame?
One that stands out for me would be College Now, as the Community Foundation does traditionally support their work at Wellington and Clearview High Schools, and they have really had an outstanding outcome where individuals who have participated in their program have really scored above the traditional standards there. So for me, that just speaks volumes. Also, they help with FAFSA, which many times you don't realize people really just kind of shy away from it from fear of not knowing how to complete those documents. Also being able to take field trips to visit the actual schools. And then another component is they recognize that not everyone is ready for college. So they have really amped up their career exploration piece, which I think is really, when we talk about being inclusive, is really meeting the students where they're at and giving them options so that they can continue on their road or their journey to success. Another one that stands out for me, which is very new to our grant cycle, is the Confess Project. And it is a project that was founded by a gentleman named Lorenzo Lewis, and his passion for really reaching out to Black men and boys around culturally appropriate resources for mental health. He starts his journey, or he tells his story by stating that, have you ever been in a situation where you were told to man up? And then he talks about all he wanted to do was cry. And then he also says how many people wish that they had someone who really understood where they were coming from. And this has led him to create the Confess Project of America, which is a national program that has come to Lorain County. It came as a result of a 2020 assessment done by the Suicide Coalition. And they have identified that just among the Black community, that suicide rate is the third leading cause of death. So they recognize, what can we do to kind of address this concern? So they have done quite a bit of research and found that many barbershops and stylists are a trusted place for people to be, and there's a lot of conversations that take place there. So they have created this program to train barbers and stylists to be advocates for mental health. Their focus is on awareness of mental health and finding culturally appropriate resources and treatment options for Black men and boys. So we were glad to see them in our cycle. We're glad at the work that's being done in our community, and we are looking forward to seeing the outcomes of this particular project.
And I think what's important with a lot of that is not all of these opportunities are things that we find on our own. Some of these opportunities are things that are brought to us. So I think about the idea of Jamie, talking through Lakeland. Some of these newer grant recipients from our regular grant cycle have come from Lakeland and their $500 grant that they do. Talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, we are grateful because we have the Lakeland mini grant program, which is essentially the generosity of the Lakeland Endowment Fund. This was a foundation, and in fact, a hospital foundation, that was finding as its board members and physicians were aging that they were looking to what was the next level for their legacy. And we're very thankful that they granted a large portion of their assets to Community Foundation. And as I understand it, that conversation that they had with us at the time was really about, will you carry out our legacy? That this idea of sort of mini grants or small grants. And I'm thankful that I get a chance to work with some of the former board members, and they talk about helping the little person is what was important to them. So you're absolutely right. There's oftentimes those grassroots organizations, projects that may not be a 501c3 yet that are working with the fiscal sponsor, and they come to us through Lakeland, and that can often act as a ladder to then go on to our affiliate fund cycles or to go into our general grant cycles.
And it's a great opportunity to build those relationships and just to see some of these organizations evolve and really be able to help some of those smaller organizations. I think about the Heart of Patriots, which is a group that works with, the spouses and significant others of veterans, because, so many folks focus on the needs of the veteran, but the support system for the veterans need their own support sometimes. years, and just the work that she's been able to do in a relatively short period of time with being able to raise funds and get engaged in the local community. And eventually, she wants to take this beyond Lorain County and nationally for broader veteran support for those spouses and for those significant others. And a lot of that comes from the generosity of, not so much the Community Foundation, but the donors that give to the Community Foundation. And, while we love the idea of donors creating funds and putting their own mark on things, as Jamie and I mentioned earlier on, there's a network of 700 plus funds that you can go onto our website and peoplewhocare.org and read through what some of these groups do. We have focus areas that you can narrow by. If you want to support a specific school district, you can narrow down the school district. If you want to see which funds are part of our affiliate funds, you can narrow down by the various affiliate funds. And any of those funds are open to support from anybody in the community. So it's important to, if you have any resources that you want to be able to put towards something that you're passionate about, we can help connect you as someone who cares with those causes that matter. And I just want to take the last 5 minutes. We're inching ever so closer to September 21st. And many of you may know, if you've been in Lorain County for the last couple of years, Lorain County and Connect to a Cause. And Jamie, why don't you, before I'll jump in a little bit and tell us a little bit about Connect to a Cause?
Sure. Connect to a Cause is just a special day. It's our 12 hours of crowdfunding, so it's usually 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And there are this year 90 plus organizations who are joining us in this endeavor. So these are 90 organizations who have endowments at Community Foundation. And this is everything from perhaps your school endowment to Second Harvest, to the food bank, to animal welfare, to youth development, to our libraries. Imagination Library is a part of it as well. I mean, any need that you want to think about, you're going to probably find in this portfolio. And so this is then the community coming together on this one day to say, we've got donors that come in and say, okay, how many organizations do you have? Here's my gift, split it 90 ways. There are some that come in and say it's all for this one and everything in between. And in the last 3 years, we've raised $750,000, essentially in 3 days. I mean, that's just remarkable. And that is because we're all philanthropists, and that is our community coming together, and it's just the heart of what we do.
And I think one of the greatest pieces of that is that it doesn't have to be, a lot of folks go in and say, oh, well, I'm going to support this organization. And then they look at the list of those participating organizations. They're like, oh, I forgot about this organization. And, oh, wait, so-and-so works for that organization. So they go in with the idea of making, a $100 gift to one organization, and then they end up making, 10 other $10 gifts or $20 gifts to the 10 other organizations that they realize they have some kind of touch to. And, Lynn, I know you and I spoke before about how a number of those organizations are in that health and human services space and really focused on some of the biggest needs in the community.
Yes. So, as I shared earlier, my passion is health and human services. So it's exciting to see all the nonprofits come out together, and the excitement and the energy level as they have opportunities to highlight the work they do. So my first experience was shortly after I joined the team to be able to be a part of that and being able to interview some of the organizations that were participating. And I will tell you, the energy level is just something that you can't describe. So if you have an opportunity to come out and just see what Connect to a Cause is all about, really tune in to the streaming and et cetera to really see what the organizations are doing and highlighting the work that they're doing to impact the community.
And it is a great opportunity. Most donations can be as little as $5. So even if you're just looking at where can I put, this $5, or where can I put these 3 or 4 gifts of $5, and if you have more capacity to do so, we've seen a number of folks that may have. We spoke briefly about donor advised funds. Not all donor advised funds exist within the Community Foundation. A lot of donor advised funds exist with financial institutions institutions like Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard, or may exist in certain faith-based institutions, or within colleges and universities have their own donor advised funds. So if you're a donor that has a donor advised fund, it's a great way to one-stop shop and make a gift out of your donor advised fund to any number of the 94 participating nonprofits this year. If you're somebody that has an IRA and is typically taking your qualified charitable distribution, or want to repurpose your required minimum distribution to do something charitable and not have it count as your income, it's another great avenue where you can take that dollar amount that might be income that you don't really need and put it towards a charitable purpose. We have a lady that comes in every year for Connect to a Cause and says that she wants to use her IRA RMD and apply it towards, any 10, 12 organizations for Connect to a Cause that day. And that's how she, gets her charitable benefit of utilizing her required minimum distribution. But it's a great avenue to really get an idea of that landscape that you might not be fully aware of the different organizations that exist in our community. 94 is what we have this year. It's been growing by leaps and bounds every year, but it's barely the tip of the iceberg in regards to the nonprofit landscape that we have in Lorain County. And we're thrilled to be able to connect people who care with causes that matter. And we hope that you will reach out to us if you have any questions. Jamie, Lynn, any final thoughts as we wrap up?
I would just say that you belong at Community Foundation of Lorain County. We just had our annual meeting, and belonging was just a strong theme that we had. Whether it's volunteering, whether it's donating, whether it's coming out to one of our neighbor nights, you belong at Community Foundation of Lorain County. So we hope you see you soon.
Yes.
So as you think about your time, your talent, your treasure, your time, your testimony, we hope that we can be here to assist you and help, connect to you as someone who cares with causes that matter. And we look forward to seeing you next time, when I believe we'll be talking about scholarships and sharing some of those exciting stories about students in Lorain County. And like Lynn said, not all of them are going into school. Some are going into the workforce or professional education training. So it's a great avenue to revisit us later. So we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.
The proceeding was a paid informational program. The views and opinions expressed were not necessarily those of the staff, management, or advertisers of WOBL Radio.
WOBL Oberlin and WOBL Radio.